Hello and welcome to Tower. On the bench today is my Tamiya TRF211XM and a bit that I've been using for modern racing for the last couple of years. Now somewhere along the way I'm going to be replacing it with a Nemo Racing N110, but that's another story. We'll come to that on a different video. So why is this on the bench? Well, along with vintage racing in the UK, there's also a rise in rear motor racing. And generally, as long as something was ever released originally as a rear motor, it can be eligible. The TRF211XM, of course, is a mid-motor vehicle, but mine was originally a 201, which is a rear motor. And the job today is to turn it back into its rear motor. I've got a collection of all of the parts, and we'll go through those and talk about what they are. I'll talk briefly about why my 211 is a bit more than a regular 211. But before we put it back to being a 201, I'll talk you through what's special about my 211 and a bit, why it's a little bit beyond the regular 211, some of the special features that have happened to it and allowed me to continue to race it till now. So there should be two obvious things with my 211. The body is a lead finger racing rear cab that I've brutally cut down to fit the chassis. Obviously there's no TRF specific body shell by lead finger racing, but this is close enough. And it's also changed so that we've got disco disc wheels running hexes all around, and I'll show you the hex conversion that I've done on this to allow that to happen. We'll also get it on the scales just so that you can see how light this car is. It's well underweight in its current configuration. The local club doesn't notice or mind about it. If I was to try and race it more officially, it's definitely a long way underweight. So there we are, closer up. You can see it's got a white bathtub chassis that's common to the TRF211. I believe that's the major thing that makes it so light. We'll see that shortly. To facilitate front hexes, you can see on the front end here, we're running hex hubs. The hubs on the front here are taken from the 2022 Tamiya Astute, and that runs hex hardware all round. It's a fairly straightforward front end swap. It's the same dimensions for the hinge pins for the arms. The one downside of running it as this conversion is with flat arms, you end up with the steering blocks hitting the arms at full droop. It's not a problem when the suspension is loaded, but I do know running DB01 steering arms would resolve the issue. The other key part of my Tamiya is the rear end here. You can see is mid-motor. It's mid-motor with a 3D printed gearbox. This gearbox was designed by Cy Turner, and I was very lucky to find one in used condition. And so here you can see more of that gearbox. The motor plate is from a Yokomo, but everything else is standard Tamiya internals. For more information about this gearbox, go ahead and look it up on Tamiya Club, referred to as a Tamiya TRF211 laydown gearbox. So here we are on my corner weight system, and I'll put on screen what shows up. That came out as 1400 grams, including a race battery and 50 grams of additional weight underneath the battery. So before we get to the swap, let me put that aside and show you a little bit of the parts that we've got to do to put it back. Over here we've got a regular 201 chassis and battery strap, motor guard. In terms of gearbox, I have two gearboxes and I don't recall why. This one, the one with the motor plate attached, is actually a 3D printed gearbox, and my expectation is that's necessary for fitting of the gear diff that's currently in the 211. I also have the original Tamiya diff here inside an original Tamiya gearbox. I presume the ball diff is slightly narrower, hence why this is here. We've also got hubs all round. I've got some additional toe ones for the rear. It's going to be run indoors on honeycombs, and I suspect the rear towing is going to be important. Other key thing I picked up recently is a custom RC brass front bulkhead. Beautiful piece of engineering, and a little bit more weight on the nose, again, might be useful. I'll be able to swap out for the original if I so need, but lovely piece of engineering. And finally, I was lucky enough for the 201 I bought to come with a brand new unused TRF201 body. I'll show you at some point soon what I'm going to be doing about paint. So somewhat annoyingly, I detached and reattached the front end without recording any of it, and I've taken the gearbox off the chassis without recording that either. However, I do have to do some changes to the front end because I want to be running the original hubs, and I've got to a point here where I'm ready to show you something about the gearbox here. So this is Turner's laydown gearbox, and the real purpose of this is to move the motor way further forward than you would get out of the standard mid-engine Tamiya 211. Now, I don't have a regular 211 gearbox. I do have the gearbox from the 201 to 211 XMW conversion, and that's really only for the alloy chassis, but it gives you an indication as to where the motor sits in relation to the diff. So if we take a look at this as we have it here on screen, and I bring in the diff housing for the XMW and line that up, what you find is the location for the motor here is way short. Here we are. So on Turner's gearbox, the distance between the motor and the diff there is something like 66 millimeters, something of that range. So center to center. Now I can't quite do the same with my XMW housing, but we'll do something here. So everything is reversed, the motor sits the other way around, but we can apply the same thing here. He says we got to get it right. Line the holes up. I could put screws through, but line the holes up. That is the gearbox, the standard gearbox for a blue being the XMW conversion kit. So the same is somewhat true. If we measure that and go generously between the centers, talking there something of the order of 49-50 millimeters between the centers of the diff and the motor at that point, something like 50. And so you can see really the difference that's had on the laydown, really throwing the motor further forward, and adjustments needing to be made to the chassis to allow that to happen. Makes it a lot more agile, but also more difficult to drive and to set up. So I'm expecting it to be much easier to drive in rear motor configuration, although I'll be then needing to balance weight over the front more, and hence the brass front bulkhead. One problem I've just realised with this motor is the pinion is stuck. I will need to release the thread lock there. This motor and ESC is going into my next modern. It's a 9.5 turn, so actually it's too quick for most rear motor racing in the UK, which requires a 10.5 turn, same as vintage. So we'll keep that attached to the motor plate for the moment. I am somewhat mindful about wanting to keep the right screws in the right place for this gearbox, just for if and when I resurrect a 211XM again in the future. We do need to take the shock tower. Now the shock tower is made by Fiberlight. Again, it was done to Turner's specifications, based really about his mounting points having to be slightly different to that of the 211XM. So it's broadly similar but has different screw holes here for adapting to his gearbox rather than the Tamiya one. That's the gearbox, more or less broken down, and you can see here diff, idler, and the spur gear shaft. So I've just been having a quick play around with my two gearboxes to try and double check why we have two gearboxes, and it becomes really obvious as soon as you line up these two diffs against each other. On the right hand side here with the light coloured gear, this is the ball diff that comes as standard in a 201, and that has a bearing to bearing dimension 17.7mm, so probably 18mm shimmed or whatever. If I take those same bearings and attach them onto the sealed gear diff, that runs to 24.5mm across. So we're talking there basically 6.5mm extra. And that is why my reserve 3D printed diff is so much broader across it, because of this for the gear diff, this being for the ball diff. Now I think, given the state of the drive cups, given we're going to be running it, where are we running it? I will go check the surface and then make a decision based off that. The answer is it's multi-surface. I think, including carpet, I think our best bet is to stay with the gear diff. The wear on those cups is high. I will plan on getting hold of another set of drive cups and switching them over, but I will assemble it as is for now to make sure I've got something ready to go. Great. That already has one idler in place. So of the choices available to me at the moment, I'm going with the gear diff. I think the ball diff, the teeth on the ball diff I think are quite worn, and I think that's a bit problematic. So let's go find the instructions and get that gearbox mounted in the car, I guess.